Can a king rule without sight? Not just the eyes, but the ability to see the truth. Imagine a man whose blindness, both physical and emotional, shaped the fate of an entire dynasty. Meet Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapur, a man who loved deeply, ruled with uncertainty, and left behind a legacy of lessons for all of us. In our previous video, we talked about Vyasa, the wise sage who composed the Mahabharata. But Vyasa wasn't just a storyteller. He played a direct role in shaping the Kuru dynasty. It was Vyasa who ensured the birth of Dhritarashtra, a crucial figure in the epic. And today we are diving into Dhritarashtra's journey, his strengths, his struggles, and the decisions that change everything. Let's start at the beginning. Dhritarashtra wasn't born like most children. His mother Ambika was widowed when her husband, King Vichitravirya, died childless. To continue the royal lineage, Vyasa stepped in through a practice called niyoga, where a sage fathered children on behalf of a deceased king. But here is where things took a turn. When Vyasa approached Ambika, she closed her eyes in fear, unable to look at his ascetic form. This act of shutting her eyes caused Dhritarashtra to be born blind. Now think about this. His blindness wasn't just a physical condition, it was symbolic of his life. He struggled to see the truth around him, to judge fairly, and to act decisively. And this blindness, it wasn't just his downfall, it shaped the destiny of the entire Kuru dynasty. Growing up as a blind prince wasn't easy. Dhritarashtra had strength, wisdom, and the royal lineage, but his blindness was seen as a limitation. Many questioned whether he could ever be an effective ruler. Despite this, he was chosen to rule Hastinapura when his younger brother Pandu stepped down. But here is the thing. While Dhritarashtra was on the throne, he rarely acted independent. He depended heavily on the advisors like Bhishma, Vidura, and later Sanjaya. And this dependence didn't stop at governance. It extended to his family, especially his sons. Dhritarashtra's love for his eldest son, Duryodhana, often clouded his judgment. He knew Duryodhana's actions were wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to stop him. This attachment became a recurring thing in his life. Now, Dhritarashtra wasn't ignorant. He knew the principles of dharma, righteousness, but knowing and doing are two very different things. When the infamous gambling match between the Pandavas and Kauravas took place, Dhritarashtra allowed it to happen, despite knowing it was unjust. When Draupadi was humiliated in the court, he failed to intervene. And these moments, my friends, were pivotal. They weren't just events, they were cracks in the foundation of the Kuru dynasty. So why did Dhritarashtra act or not act the way he did? Some say it was his blindness, his inability to see the chaos around him. Others say it was his deep love for his sons, especially Duryodhana. But one thing is clear, his choices remind us of the consequences of inaction. Dhritarashtra's story is filled with moments of reflection, regret, and eventual resignation. But it's not just his story, it's also the story of those around him. Gandhari, his wife, chose to blindfold herself to share his experience of darkness. And Duryodhana, his son, became the cause of great war. In the next part of the series, we'll explore Dhritarashtra's life as a king, his role in the Kurukshetra war, and how he faced the ultimate tragedy, the loss of all his sons. And stay tuned for our next video where we will shift focus to Gandhari, the queen whose loyalty and sacrifice defined her. Dhritarashtra's life is a lesson for all of us. It teaches us that love and attachment, when unchecked, can lead to destruction. But it also shows us the complexity of human emotions, how even a king can be torn between his head and his heart. So what do you think? Was Dhritarashtra a victim of his circumstances, or did his choices define his fate? Let me know in the comments. Imagine being born into royalty, destined to rule, yet carrying a unique burden from birth, a blindness that isn't just a physical but symbolic. Today we are diving into the fascinating birth story of Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapura, and what his blindness meant for his life and legacy. Let's start with an extraordinary event that set the stage for Dhritarashtra's life. His father wasn't alive when he was conceived. Yes, you heard that right. After King Vichitravirya died childless, the royal lineage faced a crisis. Who would carry forward the Kuru dynasty? This was when Vyasa, the wise sage and the author of the Mahabharata, stepped in with an ancient practice called niyoga. Niyoga was a tradition where a learned sage would father children for a deceased man to ensure the continuity of his family line. Vyasa was chosen for this sacred duty. He approached Ambika, one of Vichitravirya's widows, to conceive the child. But something unexpected happened. When Vyasa came to Ambika, she was overwhelmed. Imagine being in her place, facing a sage whose life was devoted to asceticism, with an intense appearance that reflected years of penance. Ambika couldn't handle it. In fear, she closed her eyes during the union. That small instinctive act of closing her eyes had a profound impact. Because of her action, the child she bore, Dhritarashtra, was born blind. His blindness wasn't just a physical limitation, it became a symbol, a recurring theme in his life and decisions. Now, here is where things get really interesting. Dhritarashtra's blindness wasn't just about his inabilities to see the world physically, it mirrored something deeper. It symbolized his failure to see the truth about his sons, about justice, and about the larger consequences of his actions. Throughout the Mahabharata, we see this play out, as King Dhritarashtra often knew what was right. He understood dharma, the principles of righteousness, but he was blind to the reality of his son Duryodhana's action. His love and attachment to his children clouded his judgment, and this blindness, this inability to act decisively, shaped the destiny of the Kuru dynasty. This isn't just a story from the past, it's a lesson for us even today. Dhritarashtra reminds us of how emotional attachments can blind us to the truth. How sometimes we fail to make the right choices because we are too close to the people or situations involved. His life teaches us to recognize our own blind spots, those moments when our emotions overpower our sense of justice. But it's not all negative. Dhritarashtra's story also shows us the humanity in leadership. He was a king, yes, but he was also a father, and like any parent, he struggled to balance love for his children with the responsibility of being fair. It's a struggle many of us can relate to. Dhritarashtra's birth wasn't just about continuing a royal lineage. It was the beginning of a story filled with complexities. His blindness, both literal and symbolic, became one of the defining elements of the Mahabharata. And here is the twist. Even though he couldn't see, his decisions affected millions. They shaped the course of a war, the fate of a dynasty, and the lessons passed down through centuries. So, what do you think? Was Dhritarashtra's blindness just bad luck, or was it a deeper reflection of the challenges he was destined to face? His story invites us to reflect on our own lives, our judgments, our attachments, and the truths we sometimes fail to see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered how someone born into royalty overcomes challenges that seem impossible? What if that person is blind? Not just physically, but caught in a whirlwind of destiny. Today, we explore the early life and marriage of Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapura, and how love, loyalty, and prophecy shaped his journey. Let's begin with Dhritarashtra's childhood. Born blind, Dhritarashtra's life was different from the start. As a prince of Hastinapura, he was part of the prestigious Kuru dynasty, but his blindness made others doubt his potential. Even though he was the eldest son, people questioned if he could ever lead. Imagine growing up with the constant reminder that your disability might keep you from fulfilling your destiny. But Dhritarashtra was no ordinary child. He had immense physical strength, a sharp intellect, and a keen understanding of dharma. Yet, despite these qualities, his blindness was a barrier, not just for others, but for himself. It defined how people saw him and eventually how he saw the world around him. Now, here is an interesting twist. Even though Dhritarashtra was the eldest, he didn't ascend the throne immediately. Why? Because his blindness was seen as a weakness. Leadership in those days wasn't just about wisdom, it was about perception, literally and figuratively. So the throne went to his younger brother Pandu, who was considered more capable of ruling. This moment shaped Dhritarashtra's life deeply. Imagine knowing that you were born to be king, but circumstances, some beyond your control, robbed you of that opportunity. Yet Dhritarashtra remained patient, waiting for his time to come. And then came Gandhari. Now Gandhari wasn't just any woman. She was the princess of Gandhara, a region known for its wisdom and wealth. Dhritarashtra's marriage to Gandhari was a significant alliance. But here is what made it extraordinary. Gandhari, upon learning that her husband was blind, made a decision that would define her life. She chose to blindfold herself, vowing to share in her husband's darkness. Think about that. This wasn't just a gesture, it was a testament of equality, of solidarity. She wanted to stand with her husband, not above him. But this act also had another impact. It symbolized sacrifice, something Gandhari would embody throughout her life. Now, marriage brought Dhritarashtra happiness, but it also came with its share of challenges. One of the most significant events in their life was the birth of their eldest son Duryodhana. This wasn't an ordinary birth. It was surrounded by omens, dark clouds, wailing animals, and airy silence. These signs alarmed the sages and the advisors of Hastinapur. In fact, Vyasa himself warned Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. He said, "This child will bring great destruction to your lineage." But as any parent would, Dhritarashtra ignored the warning. He saw Duryodhana not as a threat but as his hope, his heir, and his legacy. And this decision, as we will see later, set the stage for the Kurukshetra war. If we pause and look at Dhritarashtra's early life and marriage, there is a lot of symbolism here. His blindness represented not just a personal challenge, but also a metaphor for the choices he would make later. His inability to see the truth, especially about his sons. Gandhari's blindfold showed a deep loyalty, but also highlighted the sacrifices women often made in those times. And then there is Duryodhana's birth, a reminder of how fate can intertwine with human decisions. Despite all the warnings, Dhritarashtra's love for his family often overpowered his sense of justice. These early events tells us that Dhritarashtra's life was shaped as much by his circumstances as by his choices. Dhritarashtra's early life and marriage teach us some powerful lessons about leadership, love and loyalty. They show us how challenges can shape a person, but also how our responses to those challenges define who we become. And as we will see in the coming chapters, these lessons played out in ways that change the destiny of Hastinapura forever. Imagine being a king with the power to shape an empire, yet unable to fully control it. What happens when leadership is driven by love, fear, and indecision? Today, we are diving into the reign of Dhritarashtra, his leadership, his challenges, and how his choices shaped the destiny of Hastinapura. Dhritarashtra became the king of Hastinapura after his younger brother Pandu stepped down. But his rule was different from most kings. He wasn't a visionary ruler or a warrior on the battlefield. Instead, Dhritarashtra's reign was defined by two things: his reliance on others and his deep emotional attachment to his family. As a ruler, he faced two main challenges. First is blindness, not just physical, but a metaphorical blindness to the truth. And second, his dependence on his advisors, especially Bhishma, Vidura, and later Sanjaya. These were the people who helped him govern. But while they guided him, the real decisions often eluded him. Let's talk about the people Dhritarashtra relied on. Bhishma, his granduncle, was a pillar of strength for the kingdom. His wisdom and loyalty to Hastinapura were unmatched. Then there was Vidura, his half brother. Vidura was not only wise but also fearless in pointing out the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. And finally, Sanjaya, who became Dhritarashtra's eyes during the Kurukshetra war. Through Sanjaya, Dhritarashtra could see the battlefield in vivid detail. But here is the thing: even with such brilliant advisors, Dhritarashtra struggled to make decisions. Why? Because he was torn between his love for his sons and his responsibility as a king, and this conflict defined his leadership. Nowhere in Dhritarashtra's indecision more evident than in the infamous gambling match. When Duryodhana and Shakuni proposed a game of dice with the Pandavas, Dhritarashtra allowed it, even though he knew it was a trap. Why did he allow it? Because he couldn't say no to Duryodhana. The game of dice wasn't just a gamble, it was a turning point. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, lost everything: his kingdom, his brothers, and even their wife, Draupadi. And when Draupadi was dragged into the court and humiliated, Dhritarashtra sat silently. Think about that for a moment. A king, bound by dharma, watching injustice unfold in his own court. After the humiliation, Draupadi demanded justice, and in a moment of clarity, Dhritarashtra returned everything to the Pandavas. But the damage was done. That event sowed the seeds of hatred and vengeance, leading to the eventual Kurukshetra war. Draupadi's humiliation wasn't just a moment of personal pain. It had far-reaching consequences. It fractured the Kuru family. It fueled the Pandavas' anger and deepened the divide between them and the Kauravas. And for Dhritarashtra, it was a moment of failure as a king, as a father, and as a guardian of justice. Despite knowing that his sons were wrong, Dhritarashtra could never bring himself to discipline them. He was blinded, this time by love and fear. Fear of losing their affection, fear of breaking the family, and fear of confrontation. So, what can we learn from Dhritarashtra's leadership? First, leadership is about making tough decisions. It's about standing for what's right, even when it means going against those you love. Second, reliance on others is not a weakness, but indecision is. Dhritarashtra had great advisors, but his inability to act often turned good advice into missed opportunity. Finally, Dhritarashtra's story reminds us that love, when unchecked, can cloud judgment. As a father, he loved his sons deeply, but as a king, that love became his greatest weakness. Dhritarashtra's reign was a complex one. He wasn't a bad king, but he wasn't a great one either. His story is a reminder of the delicate balance between love, duty, and justice. So, what do you think? Was Dhritarashtra a victim of his circumstances, or did his indecision define his fate? Imagine hearing every gruesome detail of a war that decides the fate of your family, but you can't see it. Imagine losing everything you love and realizing that in some ways you helped it happen. This is the story of Dhritarashtra, during the Kurukshetra war and its devastating aftermath. The Kurukshetra war wasn't just a battle between the Pandavas and Kauravas. It was a war of dharma, justice, and survival. For Dhritarashtra, it was deeply personal. He wasn't on the battlefield, but he experienced every moment of it. How? Through Sanjaya, his trusted advisor, who narrated the events of the war in vivid detail. Imagine being blind, sitting in your palace, listening to every arrow, every cry, every death. That was Dhritarashtra's reality. And as the war progressed, so did his anguish. Let's talk about Sanjaya for a moment. He wasn't just Dhritarashtra's advisor, he was his eyes on the battlefield. With divine vision granted by Vyasa, Sanjaya could see the war in real time, and every evening he would describe the events to Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya didn't sugarcoat anything. He spoke of victories and losses, of warriors falling one by one. Dhritarashtra, sitting helplessly, could only listen. He asked questions, he hoped for miracles, but deep down he knew his sons, led by Duryodhana, were on the path to destruction. And then came the hardest part, the death of his sons. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons, and Duryodhana was his pride and joy. But one by one they fell. Bhishma, Drona, Karna, great warriors on the Kaurava side, were all defeated. And finally, even Duryodhana met his end, struck down by Bhima in a brutal mess fight. Can you imagine the pain of losing not one, not two, but all your children? Dhritarashtra's heart broke into pieces. He wasn't just mourning as a father, he was mourning as a king who had failed his dynasty. But here is the thing about Dhritarashtra. Even in his grief, he reflected on his own role in this tragedy. He knew he had made mistakes. He had allowed the gambling match. He had ignored Duryodhana's arrogance. He had chosen love for his sons over justice for the kingdom. There is a powerful moment where Dhritarashtra says, "My love for my son blinded me, and now I pay the price for my actions." These words show his guilt, his realization that his choices or lack of choices led to the end of the Kuru dynasty. After the war, Dhritarashtra was a broken man. Hastinapura was in ruins and the Pandavas had claimed victory. But even in defeat, Dhritarashtra had to face one final challenge, confronting the Pandavas, the very men his sons had fought against. In one emotional scene, Dhritarashtra embraces Bhima, the man who killed Duryodhana. But here is the twist. His embrace is filled with anger and grief, and he nearly crushes Bhima to death. It's only Krishna's intervention that saves the moment. This scene captures the complexity of Dhritarashtra's emotions, love, loss, and an overwhelming sense of regret. In the end, Dhritarashtra did what many defeated kings did. He renounced the world. Along with Gandhari and Kunti, he retired to the forest, leaving behind the palace and the burdens of the past. He spent his final years in penance, trying to make peace with his actions and their consequences. But even this wasn't the end of his suffering. Dhritarashtra's life came to a tragic close when a forest fire consumed him and those around him. It was as if the fire symbolized the burning karma of his life. Dhritarashtra's story during the Kurukshetra war is a reminder of the cost of indecision. His love for his family, though noble, blinded him to justice. And in the end, it wasn't just his sons who paid the price. He did too. So what do you think? Was Dhritarashtra a victim of his circumstances, or did his choices seal his fate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What happens when a king loses everything? His sons, his kingdom, and his legacy. How does he find peace in the shadow of destruction? Today, we will talk about the final chapter of Dhritarashtra's life, his retirement, and his tragic yet symbolic death. After the devastating Kurukshetra war, Dhritarashtra's world was shattered. All 100 of his sons, including Duryodhana, were gone. The Pandavas had claimed victory, and Hastinapura was no longer the same. Imagine carrying that grief, not just as a father, but as a king who had failed to protect his family and his people. Dhritarashtra knew he couldn't continue living in the palace. The weight of his guilt and sorrow was too much to bear. So, along with his wife Gandhari and Kunti, the mother of the Pandavas, he made a life-changing decision. They renounced the world and retired to the forest. This wasn't just an escape. It was a way to seek peace, to reflect on their lives, and to atone for their mistakes. In the forest, Dhritarashtra lived a life of penance. He gave up the comforts of royalty and embraced the simplicity of ascetic life. Every day he meditated and prayed, seeking forgiveness for the actions that had led to the war and the destruction of his family. But even in the forest, he wasn't alone. Gandhari remained by his side. Kunti, who had also lost her sons in the war, joined them. Together they supported each other through their shared grief. And then came the final chapter. One day a forest fire broke out, spreading rapidly and consuming everything in its path. Dhritarashtra, Gandhari and Kunti couldn't escape. They accepted their fate, standing still as the flames engulfed them. This wasn't just a physical death. The fire symbolized the end of their suffering, the burning away of their karma. It was as if the universe was cleansing them, freeing them from the burden of their past action. In many ways, their death in the fire was a release, a way to finally find peace after a lifetime of struggle and sorrow. Dhritarashtra's story, especially his final years, leaves us with some powerful lessons. It shows us that even in the face of immense loss, there is space for reflection and redemption. It reminds us that leadership isn't just about power, it's about responsibility, and most importantly, it teaches us that seeking forgiveness, whether from others or from ourselves, is a step toward peace. So, what do you think about Dhritarashtra's retirement and death? Was it a fitting end to his story, or could things have been different? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. What makes a legacy? Your actions or your inaction? And what do we take away from a leader torn between duty and love? Today, we are looking at the legacy of Dhritarashtra, the blind king of Hastinapura, and the lessons his life offers us. Dhritarashtra's life was a mix of greatness and tragedy. Born into royalty, he had the wisdom, strength, and lineage to be a remarkable king. But his blindness, both physical and emotional, defined his rule. His love for his sons, especially Duryodhana, often outweighed his sense of justice. And this imbalance had far reaching consequences. Despite his flaws, Dhritarashtra left behind a legacy that's rich in lessons. It's not just a story of what he did, but also what he didn't do. And in that lies the real depth of his character. So, what is Dhritarashtra remembered for? First, he symbolizes the human struggle between love and duty. As a father, he loved his children deeply, but as a king, his inability to discipline them led to chaos. His silence during the gambling match and Draupadi's humiliation weren't just failures, they were moments that shaped the destiny of the Kuru dynasty. Second, Dhritarashtra reminds us of the dangers of indecision. He had brilliant advisors like Bhishma, Vidura, and Sanjaya, yet he hesitated to act. His passivity allowed Duryodhana's arrogance and Shakuni's schemes to grow unchecked. And in the end, this passivity cost him everything: his sons, his kingdom, and his peace. Now let's talk about what we can learn from his story. Dhritarashtra teaches us that leadership is about tough decisions. You can't please everyone, especially when the stakes are high. Sometimes choosing dharma, doing what's right, means standing up to the people you love most. His life also shows us that consequences of emotional blindness. Love and attachment are powerful, but when they cloud your judgment, they can lead to disaster, whether it's in family, business, or leadership. Balance is key. And finally, Dhritarashtra's story is a reminder to reflect on our own actions or inactions. He realized too late that his choices shaped not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. It's a lesson in accountability and the ripple effects of our decisions. So, what do you think? Was Dhritarashtra a victim of his circumstances, or was his passivity his undoing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And speaking of loyalty, in our next video, we will unravel the story of Gandhari, the queen who shared Dhritarashtra's darkness both literally and metaphorically. Don't miss it. Dhritarashtra's life is a powerful story, not just of a king, but of a man grappling with the weight of love, responsibility, and loss. It's a reminder that every choice, big or small, leaves a legacy.